For more than 47 years, our nonprofit, Resources for Seniors, has supported older adults and caregivers in Wake County. We can help in many different ways, including adult daycare programs, ramps and repairs, in-home supports, and consultation and referrals. Indeed, we're who to call when you're not sure who to call. Resources for Seniors stands ready to support you in your caregiving journey.
I'm Mark Costley, the founding attorney of Clarity Legal Group, the Triangle Area estate planning and elder law firm. You know those people who become overwhelmed dealing with the multiple challenges of being a caregiver? Clarity Legal Group helps people establish legal tools that avoid confusion, give them peace of mind, give them asset protection, and in some cases help them qualify for Medicaid. We help people get it right in the face of some of life's most important challenges. We don't just provide wills, trusts, and powers of attorney. We provide solutions and ongoing support. We provide clarity and peace of mind. It would be a privilege to help you.
Are you like 80% of seniors who would like to age in your current home? Call Wisdom Senior Care. Are you currently taking care of a loved one and finding yourself frustrated, tired, and even lonely? Call Wisdom Senior Care. Always available, dependable, and flexible. Come partner with Wisdom Senior Care, keeping wisdom at home.
Oh, hey there, I'm Bryan Godfrey, and today I'm here to speak with you about caring for the caregiver, assessing and addressing your personal wellness, a topic I think we all could use a little focus on right now in particular. So, many of you are probably here today because you feel a bit like the zebra in this picture here. Its stripes are falling off, and all he can say is, I think it's stress. I want to tell you a little bit about a position that I had before my current one, and see if this sounds a little bit like something you may have experienced. There was a time when I had a different position and I was in a very high stress environment. I found that the demands were always increasing, and it seemed that every day there were not only new things to do, but new whole sets of expectations that I was being held to. And these expectations weren't realistic. I was doing talk therapy at the time, and I was being asked to see clients back to back for 20-minute sessions all day, every day. New people that I had never met with before in some cases. Completely overwhelming, completely unrealistic. Many private practice therapists will tell you that they prefer to keep a caseload of 10 or 20 people. Maybe if you're really ambitious, you'll have 50. I had 150, and it was only growing from there. So I decided to do what I could to impact this system. I spoke with my supervisor, I reached out to HR, I developed pilot programs of new ways we could do things to improve flow and, help improve everyone's morale at this system where we were all really suffering. And what I found over and over again is that nothing could change. No one was willing to even talk about change. And as soon as I brought that up, even to change a piece of paper or a form, the answer was absolutely not, we can't do that. So no surprise, this led to burnout. I burned out really hard after about 4 years of doing this work in North Philadelphia with folks that needed it more than anyone. Folks who were uninsured or underinsured, or who had Medicare and were older or more vulnerable. I wanted to help so badly that I gave so much of myself and burned out. So I realized not everyone has an opportunity like this, but I made the incredibly difficult decision to leave that position. And for the next 8 months, I was unemployed, looking for the next best thing. It took that long and about 100 applications until I finally found my current position. This was a change to a lower stress environment where I could really thrive because, well, among other things, I learned to say no. I was clear with them right off the bat of what I'm willing to do and not willing to do, the things that excite me and motivate me, and the things that just tend to drain me. This led to more realistic expectations of what I could and would do, what I was willing to do and able to do and expected to do. And I had a company that was willing to support that, a very supportive supervisor. This led to my own proactive and supported self-care. Instead of reacting to everything around me, I was able to be proactive and go out and seek those things that make me feel good, feel supported, and I was able to grow. It's amazing when you're in the right position with a supervisor who supports you, how much you actually can grow. So again, I know everyone can't make a radical change like leaving a position, so we want to focus today on smaller things that anybody can do even within their current position, but I do want to keep radical items on the agenda as well, just in case that's what's needed for you. So let's talk a little bit about stress, what it is, what it's not, and how it affects us. Stress is actually more complicated than people might think. This gentleman is named Hans Selye. He was a guy who dedicated his life to understanding and studying stress before many people were doing this. He used to say, "Everyone knows what stress is, but nobody really knows." And when we talk about stress, indeed, we're actually talking very often about a particular type of stress, chronic distress. The term stress is actually much broader, and as Dr. Selye said, it is the non-specific response of the body to any demand for change. So indeed, stress is inevitable. The only way that we'll be free of it is to be dead. Not the goal. So we're looking not to get rid of stress in our life, but to perhaps change the types of stress there are, or if we can't, change our response to that stress. And I like to emphasize too that this is a body response, not just a mind response. Now, I'm not a doctor and I'm not even a nurse, and so I couldn't describe all the details of a diagram like this for you. But what I can emphasize is that stress is something that affects the body as well as the mind. In terms of the body, it's helpful to understand that we have two basic systems that help to regulate our response to stress and our recovery from it, right? So first we have what's sometimes called the rest and digest system, the parasympathetic nervous system that is helping us to take care of ourselves, let stress go, and heal from the daily things that go on and get our body moving. And that's awesome unless, let's say, a tiger is bearing down on you. Then you're going to need something like fight or flight, right? The sympathetic nervous system to kick in, activate your organs, get you ready to do whatever you need to do, fight, flight, freeze, whatever is going to get you alive and out of that situation. But you can imagine if you stayed in that response constantly, your organs would quickly burn out and shut down. You can't maintain this state. And so that's why the parasympathetic system exists, to bring us back to that equilibrium where we can live a healthy life. So when stress occurs, it's going to cause this reaction in the body, and it's not just with those two broad systems that I've described. There's lots of systems in the body involved, and these are just a few of the hormones that play a role in this. Some of them most people have heard of, like adrenaline, but then some of them, like glucagon, very few people have heard of. Long story short, it's complicated and we're still learning about it, but every time there's stress, it affects us on a very deep level. Thinking about the different types of stress that affects us, I'm always interested in exploring what we find stressful and what we don't, because stress isn't just stress, it's what we perceive as being stressful. About 1 in 4 people have flying-related anxiety. And, if you're going through the airport and you're waiting for your plane, you're bound to see that. But if you're thinking statistically, your odds of dying in a plane crash are vanishingly small. We're talking 1 in 188,000 some odd chances of dying. It's not likely to happen at all. You're much more likely to die in a fall, about 1 in 114, or from suicide, about 1 in 88, or from the #1 killer of Americans, heart disease, in about 1 in 6. So in many ways, you should actually be more afraid of the food that they serve on the plane and the fact that you're inactive on the plane than the actual plane ride itself. Thinking like this can help you reevaluate what's actually stressful in your life and what you're simply perceiving as stressful. And I'll definitely tell you those things can be a long way out of alignment from personal experience. Factors like these tend to influence us very heavily and deeply when it comes to stress. We tend to notice the negative. These are all psychological biases that we all have. We tend to not pay attention to the positive, but we do notice the negative. You probably have an easier time remembering all the awful things that happen to you in your life than some of the most beautiful things that happen to you. Maybe you'll remember a couple, but there's probably a lot more that we haven't remembered. And even presented with two equal things, we tend to focus on the negative. We as human beings tend to make snap judgments about other people, often within fragments of a second after meeting them, and these judgments can stick around for a long time, even when the evidence goes against whatever we have just discovered, in something called the halo effect. We all have confirmation bias, that as we're looking for information and answers in this world, we tend to look for things that agree with us, and we tend to discount things that disagrees with us. This can make it incredibly hard to have a conversation with someone who feels differently than you, and we see this all the time in things like politics. We also tend to assume that other people are more similar to us than different. Sometimes there's truth in this, and we all have a shared humanity, but people can have incredibly different pasts and experiences and ways of existing in this world, so we need to pay attention to that. In addition, our expectations actually shape our experience. If you've ever seen the Matrix trilogy of movies, the second one is often considered one of the worst ones in the series and just a not very good movie in general. I personally loved it because when I went to go see it, I had an expectation in mind to see amazing special effects, and that was it. I did, and so I was happy, but many people were not. We tend to focus on our own experience rather than trying to pay attention to the experiences of others. So if it's true for us, we easily assume it's true for everyone, but that's often incorrect. We have multiple biases, and if you've ever met someone or read an article that claimed to be bias-free, it's simply impossible. We all have these systems of bias, and we owe it to ourselves to understand what they are, where they came from, and what we should do about them. And finally, mental illness. You'll hear me come back to this again and again because I was a therapist and I've seen the effects of things like stress, anxiety, and depression and trauma on people. And if you walk around with burdens like this person in the picture, it's going to be very hard to function effectively. Even if you're in a lower stress position, it may feel like a higher stress position because of the thoughts you're carrying around with you. I do want to be clear that there are different types of stress, and not all stress is bad. Eustress is the good stress. Distress is the bad stress. It's all relative to how we feel and function in the world. These two diagrams can help illustrate that. If we're having the right amount of stress, we'll find ourselves in a sort of middle zone where we feel productive and motivated and energized. Sometimes we enter a state of flow where it feels like time just disappears and we're engrossed in this activity. We need to be in this zone because otherwise we tend to get bored and apathetic, but if the stress level gets too high, we tend to get overwhelmed and burned out. We don't need to be in this middle ground all the time. It's often awesome to be in the comfort zone, but we need to stretch ourselves now and then to feel like we're having a meaningful life. People find all different ways to find that increase of a little bit of stress that makes them feel good. And you can think of the example of a roller coaster. This is often, for people that like roller coasters, just a mild stress response. They get on it, they know what to expect, they know it's safe, and so they have a good time, the ride's over, and then they return to the baseline that they had before. So nothing major happens. But imagine the roller coaster never ended, and you're constantly experiencing that increased level of stress. Your body is going to have a great deal of trouble rebounding, and your parasympathetic system is not going to be able to compensate because the stressor hasn't ended. Now, you don't have to literally be on a roller coaster. You could be on one in your own mind, where your thoughts are convincing you that the stress is not gone. And if you've ever come home from a busy, stressful day at work and you feel like you're still at work, you know what I'm talking about here. It's difficult for you to recover when it feels like the stressor hasn't left. What does stress us out? Well, there's many things, and these are the most common. No surprises here. Money, work, our family responsibilities, our health concerns, and especially now, I think all of these are even greater than ever. Maybe adding to it, things like worrying about where the nation's going, politics, always a concern. And we have been very much shown in recent times, reminded, I should say, that This stress affects different people differently. The social determinants of health are extremely powerful. Just to give a few somewhat random examples, women are more likely than men to report having a great deal of stress, and African Americans, especially if they're of low income, report not only more stressful life events, but greater distress coming from those life events. And in particular, trauma, often underdiagnosed in folks that are not, whatever the normal would be in a given culture, often a white male, trauma is often not identified, not diagnosed, not properly treated. And it's worth mentioning about trauma in particular. When there is a stressful event that is traumatic, it by definition overwhelms our ability to cope. And so there's no way that even the strongest attempt of our parasympathetic system can help bring us back to baseline. We just don't get there. And so because we're already elevated, it just takes the slightest thing to trigger us again and again, and the emotional response can be just as powerful as it was the first time it happened. So, whether you're experiencing a single trauma, several of them, or just chronic stress that never seems to go away, all of these can be symptoms that you might experience. You can move from, having energy and being energetic, feeling good, to being burned out and feeling like you can't do what you used to do. These are just some of the symptoms. In particular, if you are hearing from other people that they're concerned about you, if you're getting negative feedback from work, if you're noticing difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, changes in your behavior, changes in your emotion, if you're suddenly finding yourself unusually emotional at different times, having trouble managing the things that you used to manage before, any of these can be signs of caregiver burnout, and I hope you pay attention to them. The way to address this, whether you're trying to avoid burnout or whether you're already in it and you're trying to find a way out, the way to address it is self-care. But if self-care was easy, we'd probably all be doing it already. We should take some time to look at what can get in the way and how we can make this work for us. So, self-care is defined as taking care of yourself. It really is as simple and as specific to you as that. It's any activity that we do deliberately in order to take control and take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health. You see in the comic here that we're all tempted to try to fix other people, right? And maybe drawn to help others if you'd rather look at it that way. But we need to take some time for ourselves as well. Difficult as that is, yes, but crucially important. Let's look at some of the common strategies that people already use to manage stress. These are the relatively easy ones to do, right? What do we tend to do? Well, we watch TV, we surf the net, we eat, we drink, we smoke, all these sorts of things. And I want to emphasize that there's nothing inherently wrong with these as a way of dealing with stress. If it helps, you could consider it self-care. The trouble is that we often overindulge in these things. And we also do these things to avoid dealing with the real problem. It just is a temporary panacea. We feel better for a while, but the problem is still there. So instead, we might want to focus on self-monitoring, figuring out exactly what's going on here and how we relate to it, as well as practicing some self-care that's a little more intentional and a little different from the things that come easiest to us. Now, I've talked with a lot of people about managing their stress level better, and these are the most common barriers that they will mention when I mention self-care. First thing I'll hear, I'm too burned out to do anything else. I can't possibly add on another thing to my plate. Number 2, other people come first. There's no time. I have to take care of this person first. My needs need to come later. Self-care is selfish. And finally, I mentioned number 3, not enough time, probably the number one thing that I hear. I would love to do self-care. There's just nowhere to fit it in to my busy schedule. And so this is why about 1 in 5 Americans, about 20%, say they do nothing to manage their self-care because they believe they can't. And if you believe that too, then you won't. But you don't have to believe that. Let's look at each one of these. I like this image of holding a glass of water because you could imagine doing it, and it might be uncomfortable or even difficult, maybe even very difficult depending on your situation, but for many of us, it wouldn't be too bad. But imagine you continued to hold it for minutes and hours. And days? I mean, it's just not imaginable. There's no way we could do it, right? A simple glass of water would become unmanageable for us. So please, don't judge yourself because the stress that you're feeling isn't big enough. If you've been carrying it for a long time, it doesn't matter how big it is, it can affect you in a great way. If you feel like you're already beyond your limits and too burned out, I say, congratulations. You know your limits, and you know you're already beyond them. You realize that you need help, and that's okay. Thank you for being in that position. Now you owe it to yourself to take the next step and get that help that you admit that you need. If you have physical health problems, bring them up to your doctor. If you're feeling like you're in a struggle, share it with someone. Many people feel like this won't make any difference, and no one wants to hear them complain. You might be surprised how people actually react when you share your struggle. Attend to those mental health needs if you've identified them. Stress, anxiety, depression, anything like that. You don't actually have to be mentally ill in order to see a therapist. Maybe make an appointment and see how it feels to talk with someone. Recognize what caused your burnout and choose to do something different. Number 2, other people come first. You have to put on your own mask before you assist others. Many of us have been told this on the airlines, and maybe we even hesitated. No, I would take care of my loved one, my child, whatever, before I took care of me. But in fact, if you're in an emergency situation, you may need to address yourself quickly so you don't pass out, because if you are, you're not going to be able to help anybody else. And so that's why we say things like, you've got to nourish to flourish. And my personal favorite, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself first. If you're too burned out, you will actually end up inadvertently causing harm. And if you've ever snapped at a loved one because you were tired, you did a little piece of this. It's okay. You're meaning your best. But please, do something about this so you can be the caregiver you truly want to be. We think that other people come first, and I really want to point out this site, tinybuddha.com, with Jo Ritchie. She has several things here that can be very helpful as we think about why we're putting other people first all the time. A lot of times we feel like self-care is selfish. We feel like we need to rescue someone rather than just show we care. We're accustomed to relationships based on neediness, but not real love. We don't necessarily have to solve other people's problems for them. That's often not our job, and often they resent us for trying. It can be very difficult to find this line if there's someone who's truly dependent on you. And this is where something like parental counseling, couples therapy, or even individual therapy can be helpful. Because what we often don't realize as well is that we are teaching people how to treat us. Every time you interact with someone, you are establishing with them what's appropriate and inappropriate for you, what you'll put up with and what you won't, what you'll do and what's on them. So we need to pay attention to that. Also, some of us will give, but we secretly expect something in return. This is unfair. If you're going to give freely. And pay attention to the feelings that you have when you do give. And finally, we often don't recognize our own worth. All people are inherently valuable, and you are no different. You're worth just as much as the person that you're caring for, and to acknowledge that can help you bring about some change. Number 3, not enough time. You cannot do everything, so if your to-do list says everything, there's something wrong here. You might use a diagram like this to help you figure out what you can and cannot realistically do. If something is truly urgent and important to you or your boss or your family, do it by all means. It's top priority for you. If it's urgent but not so important, maybe someone else can do it. And it might not be done the way that you would do it, but maybe it's okay. Maybe it's good enough. That's worth thinking about. What if something is important, but it's not that urgent? Well, that goes on your schedule for a future date. And if something is not urgent and not important, why would you do it? Drop it. Don't put it on a schedule to do later. Just don't do it at all. When it comes to time, many of us don't realize where we're currently spending our time. We often spend a lot more time watching TV or on Facebook than we think. So paying attention to this can be helpful. We also want to pay attention to our values. What do we care about? What's important to us? We need to look at how long things actually take and admit to ourselves that we have limited energy. This way, your day becomes, well, not I don't have time for this, but I choose not to do that. And you can focus on priorities so the most important things get done. How do we practice self-care if you choose to make it a priority in your day? Well, simple way to do it is through exercise. The Academy of Medical Royal Colleges in the UK says that if exercise, physical activity was a drug, it would be a wonder drug. A lot of us are dying, not just due to obesity, but to inactivity. There's a lot of research that's showing that sitting is probably the worst thing we can do. And how many of us are doing that right now? Exercising means moving. It is very effective at reducing all these symptoms, improving all sorts of things from your mental health, your physical well-being, your sleep, and enhancing your overall cognitive function. So just to be clear, the guideline may be to do 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week, or whatever is recommended, but literally any movement seems to be helpful, even if that's just parking a little bit further and walking more, or taking the stairs instead of the elevator. And if you choose to truly make time for that 20 minutes a day, or even a week, good on you, you're making a powerful change. Looking at sleep, many of us have heard ways to improve our sleep. These are just some of the tips that you can consider as you're looking at this. And in particular, I want to focus on the alcohol, nicotine, and big meals, because these are things that affect us in ways we often don't realize. Sugar, caffeine, processed foods, all together or even separate, seem to create a vulnerability to stress. And we're still kind of understanding how this all works, but what we do know is, for example, the half-life of caffeine is about 4 to 6 hours. So at that point, around the 5-hour mark, the caffeine that you consumed is about halfway out of your system. That might change when you have that second cup of coffee during the day if you need to get to bed early. In addition, we're just starting to understand how deeply sugar affects the body, contributing to things like diabetes, sure, but also to our moods, which are dependent on that glucagon in our stress response. Just to put it in perspective, the World Health Organization recommends 25 grams of sugar a day or less. A single can of Coke has almost 40. Be careful. Check out those labels. Because when we're stressed, we tend to make poor choices and overeat, which can result in weight gain, which then makes the whole cycle harder. You'll have less energy and won't feel as good, so it'll be harder to get that physical activity and to make those positive changes that will help you feel better. And speaking of feel better, another powerful way to do it is connecting with other people. Over and over again, research seems to suggest that social connection, even for introverts, tends to be a powerful force. You don't have to be social all day, all the time. Studies show you only need one person. But if you don't have that one person to call on, that's when your physical health as well as your emotional well-being can suffer. Connection is why we're here. It's hardwired into the human being. So however you choose to connect, I hope you'll explore that. I hope you never forget that when we talk about social distancing, we really mean physical distancing. And we want to stay connected socially, whether that's enrolling in a class or a seminar, joining a club, a group, maybe starting your own, making time for the things that matter to you. And if you need help, not just asking for help, but asking for specific kinds of help from people that you know or suspect wouldn't mind giving it. If you have a friend who loves to cook and you've got a few extra dollars laying around, that might be a win-win. Connecting online, of course, is a powerful way of how we connect during COVID, and there's lots of ways to do that and lots of local groups to help you do that if you need to. I mentioned that mental health is a strong focus of mine and something I'm passionate about. These are just some examples of the thoughts that we often carry around with us and some more helpful alternatives that are worth considering. So starting at the top, we tend to overestimate what we can do. When we do that, that can lead to inevitable failure. But if you go down to the bottom, the more helpful section, accurately estimating your abilities and your needs can cause you to be successful. And that success can reinforce you to feel better and do that again. When we try to compare ourselves to others, we also notice the negative, as we discussed, is a human tendency, and this tends to lead to low self-esteem. However, if we were to compare ourselves not to other people, but to how we were in the past, this would cause us to recognize our own growth and change, and it has a very powerful result. You might try to pay attention to this the next time you're browsing Facebook or Instagram and seeing people's perfect lives and comparing them to your own. We tend to try to meet the expectations of others, which leads us to feeling weak, resentful, and regretful. But if we were to try to meet our own expectations, we tend to feel powerful and motivated. Finally, if we focus on caring only for others and we try to do it all, that road leads to burnout. If we care for ourselves and set limits, meaning saying no and asking for help, then we can lower our stress levels. Here's an acronym that you might find helpful to achieve some balance in your life. The one that I really focus on here is no. No is a word that you can learn to say. It's not easy for most of us to say no, but it is crucially important. Another one that I encounter a lot in my practice is allowing other people to share the load. If you're a close caregiver to someone, oftentimes it feels like no one can do it like you can do it. And that might be true, but remember, we're not looking for perfection. We haven't found it yet in this world. We're looking for good enough. And if someone can do it good enough, and that will help you, that's win-win, because then you'll be recharged and you can help your loved one even better. Have a message. It's on the screen. Can't read it, it's backwards.
Low battery.
Keep going?
Yeah, probably 20%.
Okay. So again, these are just a few things that might help you to pay attention as you try to achieve more balance in your life. My overall emphasis is that self-care is a thing that you can do. When it comes to stress management, all of these points can help you to achieve something that is more powerful, more effective for you. I mentioned therapy, and again, this is something that's near and dear to me. If you've never been in therapy, it can be a pretty intimidating concept. You know, what is this talking to a stranger business? Well, indeed, it can be helpful to talk to someone who's actually gone through it to see what it's like. But sometimes if you don't have someone like that, you could just ask your doctor, see what they say, and finally you might decide to just give it a go. How do you find a therapist? It's not as hard as you might think. You can actually simply call up your insurance company. Often on the back of your card, there's a member services number where you can contact a mental health professional and get a referral, through your insurance. Or if there's an online portal, you can search for a provider. Type in something like mental health and your zip code, and you'll probably be able to find providers near you. It may be hard since you don't have a personal recommendation, but honestly, those can only go so far anyway. It's important that you realize therapy is about a connection to someone, and it's the connection to that person that can really facilitate change. So again, that's what we're looking for. Something that can help you realize where you are and move in a direction of change. But remember, therapy is not for everybody, and if you'd rather talk to someone like a counselor or a trusted family friend, that's awesome. Just remember that if it's someone in the household, they might be too close to it. They might be just as embroiled in all of this stress as you are. Getting that fresh perspective can be important. And again, therapy is just one way to go about self-care. There's so many others. We talked about exercise and how even small amounts of physical movement in your day can add up to make a huge difference. And then there's so many other things you could give a try. You could finally take that spa day that you've been putting off for so long. You might find yourself getting into mindfulness meditation. You might decide to start yoga or simply pay more attention to your time management. One thing I used to do when I was in clinical practice is in between patients, I would take a minute or two and listen to a single song on my headphones. And I found that changed and freed up my emotional state so I could keep going. It might only be a couple minutes, but that might be all you need. So, I'd like to show you briefly a few things that you can do as you get started if you truly don't know where to begin with this. The idea of mindfulness means paying attention to something on purpose and with as little judgment as you possibly can. And that last one is often the most difficult thing of all. When you're being mindful, you are simply noticing. You might be noticing something that's in the space around you, and if you were to look right now, I bet you could spot something or notice something that you've never noticed before, even in a space when you've been in it a million times, right? And this is the idea, paying attention. We're doing this on purpose. It's not an accident. It's something we're purposefully taking the time to do, and we're doing it without judgment. Maybe you notice a crack in the wallpaper or in the ceiling, and you judge that, oh, I hate that, this dirty office, I have to fix it. No, these are just judgments. Just notice the thing, and then let it go. Wait for the next thing to come. One of the most powerful ways to do this is to sit quietly and notice the thoughts that come to your mind. Rather than get caught up in them and pay attention to them, imagine they're just birds in the sky, and you're just watching them pass. There's a thought, and there's another. Or imagine they're droplets of rain, and you're catching them in different buckets. Oh, here's a thought about work. Here's a thought about my kids. Here's a thought about money. And it all drips into the bucket, and your only job is to catch them. You'll stay plenty busy. The mind is what it is. It's a thought-generating machine. That's not good or bad, it just is. And so we accept that fact. Remember that our thoughts are not truths. They're just thoughts. We pay attention to them, and that changes our relationship to them. When you do that, you can actually disrupt the chain that you've had all along between thought, emotion, and behavior. Same thing you do with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, if you're doing therapy. And if you like, there's lots of therapists who can help you with mindfulness practice. You can also do a guided meditation, something where someone will speak a story perhaps to you and you will envision it. The whole goal of something like that is to distract the mind. So rather than focusing on all the things you usually do, you get some time to breathe and relax. That doesn't mean that those things aren't important. It just means this isn't the time for them. And this can help you when it comes to prioritizing in your life, learning how to set things aside temporarily, and then going back to pay attention to them when you need to. Progressive muscle relaxation is another way that you can, just whenever you have a moment or two, find a little bit of stress relief in your life. So, the way that you'll do this is you'll start perhaps at the top of your body and work your way down. And anytime you come across something you feel you could tense up, that's what you do. And so when you get to your face or your forehead, you tense that up. You hold it for just a second or two, but you really feel it. And then you breathe out as you let it go. You take that all the way down the body. And when you've done this a few times, you can do it in just a minute or two, going down the whole body, or you can really get into this and take 20 minutes to do it in a nice, slow, progressive way. Most people say they feel very different after they've done this compared to the beginning. Maybe you're tired, but probably you're just feeling a little bit of stress relief. And of course, do this to your comfort. If there's something that feels painful, you can lay off of that. Even skip that part if you need to. Just do what feels good to you, even if you're just clenching a fist and letting it go. And the last one on this slide is paced breathing. I gave two examples here, a 2-3-4 or a 4-7-8. Doesn't really matter how you're pacing your breathing or what numbers you're using. There's some research that suggests that breathing out for about twice as long as you breathe in can be helpful. So you might do something like this. Just so. You breathe in to a count of 2, you hold for a count of 3, and you breathe out to a count of 4. Whatever your comfort level is, and some people prefer longer numbers to get a greater sense of relaxation. Recommend doing this at least 4 times, and as you see, it doesn't have to take very long. It's something you can do and just bring a little bit of peace back in your day. These things can be cumulative, and over time, you can feel much better. What do I do for self-care? Glad you asked. There's lots of things that I've incorporated into my day. On the right here, you can see a picture of a place in North Durham called Turtle Hole. This is on the Eno River, and there's a little spot where there's some rocks, and then there's a big open area, almost like a little lake where people like to swim. It's a swimming hole. But that spot, you'll see my wife Janice is in the water there, and that's our favorite spot to be, because it's like a natural jacuzzi there. I mean, you've got the rapids, it's not dangerous, it's just shallow, you can sit down in it, and as long as it hasn't been raining a lot, on a 90-degree day, there's no better place to be. You can relax and let the water rush over you, and know that you're not wasting water or electricity in a hot tub somewhere, you're just out in nature. And there's a little hike to get to it too. So if you're interested, head on your favorite search engine and type in Turtle Hole, North Durham. You'll find it. The one on the left there is a picture of a video game of all things. This game is called Subnautica. I love video games, and this is, in particular, is one that can help me to relax. The whole point of this game is just to explore an underwater world. And sure, there's a little bit of suspense and a story to keep you going, but for the most part, it's about exploration. Finding new things, discovering new life forms and scanning them, gathering resources, and building structures. Maybe you're not a gamer, and that's cool, but this is something that speaks deeply to me, and I can just lose myself for a bit in this beautiful underwater paradise and get a little break from my regular day. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. Whatever it is that gives you a little sense of relaxation, I hope that you'll realize that not only is this crucial for you, but it's crucial for the one that you're caring for. I hope you'll think long and hard about some of those barriers we mentioned, that if you're too exhausted, maybe you take that spa day and help rebuild some of that energy that you've lost. If you need to attend to physical or mental health problems, I hope that you'll do that. I hope that you'll realize that you have worth too. We all do. We deserve as much happiness as we can find in this world. And if you're in a position where that's very difficult right now, I empathize. There might be very little you can do to bring about change, but there might be more than you're assuming there is, and there might be someone to help you on that journey. Ask for help when you need it, and be specific about that. And finally, remember that time, sure, we have a finite amount of time every day, but it's really how we choose to spend that makes the difference between feeling like our life is out of our control and unfulfilling, and something that we feel deeply enriches us as people. And so another thing, we tend to put other people first. Like I say, this is something I found on tinybuddha.com. Wanted to call your attention to this thing from Jo Ritchie. She has a whole article that elucidates these 6 points and a few others, and I think they're really worth paying some attention here. We tend to put other people first, oftentimes because we feel guilty about putting ourselves first. These are some of the thoughts that might influence that. We tend to think that self-care means being selfish. You know, we often don't realize that in order to take care of someone else effectively, we need to take care of ourselves. If we're too tired, too stressed, too burned out, we're not going to have the patience and the love and attention that we need to be able to give to our loved one. If we are simply hungry, even something as simple as that can cause us to change how we interact with other people. And if you've ever tried to care for someone with dementia or a young child, you know you have to be on top of your game. And if you're not feeling your best, how you interact with that person can often suffer. We confuse rescuing with caring. Many of us think that we have to do it all for another person. We have to completely transform their life because the way things are now are just unacceptable. There's a couple things to pay attention to in this. We often assume that we know better than the other person what's best for them. That may or may not be true. And if the person still has capacity, that is, they have the ability to think and make judgments, have their own opinions, and experience the consequences of their actions, then that's okay. We can express that we care, we can offer suggestions and ideas. But ultimately, if the person's over 18 and they're not cognitively impaired, they have the right to make their own decisions, including bad ones, and to experience the consequences of those actions. They're not our consequences to bear. So when we save that person from them and bear them on their behalf, it actually prevents them from experiencing the natural consequences of their actions and therefore changing their behavior. We're also accustomed to relationships that are based on neediness, but not real love. In fact, I've been struck by how powerful this can be for some people. If someone expresses that they would never look at another person, I mean, we may take pride in that. We may feel good, but it's also not realistic. We're just looking around seeing people all the time. A figure of speech, yes. But it also reinforces this cultural paradigm of neediness, that we need people to need us. We need to be needed. Do you, though? I mean, is that really the relationship dynamic that you want? To be needed? Does that say more about them or you? All deep things that often will need some help to work through. We often don't realize that the way we treat people teaches them how to treat us. Every time we interact with someone, we are conveying to them what's okay and what's not okay. If we don't say anything, then it's okay. We can't assume that they're going to think the way we think or act the way we act. And if we accept something, then it's acceptable. If we say no, then it's not. But we are actually training people in how it's okay to interact with us. We can't help it. So pay attention to that and make sure you're sending the signals that you need to send. We give, but we often expect something in return. And if you're honest with yourself, how many of us don't give freely? If you're going to give, it's crucial that you give freely and not expect anything in return. Because when we quietly keep score, we just end up driving ourselves crazy in a game that the other person doesn't even know we're playing. At least that's how I look at it. And finally, we don't realize our own worth a lot of the time. All human beings are intrinsically valuable, and you're no different. It doesn't matter what you may have done or not done in your past, or what you may or may not do in the future. The way you are right now, you have value. And if you recognize that and deeply believe that, it will change how you feel and how you act. Are you burned out? Are you worried you could be burned out? Are you seeing yourself heading in that direction? Well, these are a few things you can pay attention to help know if you're already there or to be on the lookout for in case you're afraid you might get there. Number 1, you no longer find pleasure in things you used to find enjoyable. You might notice that some of these are symptoms of depression as well, and depression can often coincide with burnout. But if you find yourself not even just tired, but just not motivated to do the things you used to enjoy, that's something to pay attention to. And in particular, if you're feeling like there is nothing that's enjoyable anymore, could be a sign of burnout or even depression. So it's worth paying attention to. If your friends and family have expressed some concern about your well-being, this is worth paying attention to as well. We often tend to discount the opinions of other people because, well, they're not us. They don't know how we're feeling. But if you're talking about friends and family, people who know you well, they tend to notice when a behavior changes, when your emotions change, when you're speaking and acting differently than you usually would. And this is something to truly pay attention to. It could be that they're seeing something that's not there and overreacting. That's quite possible. But I hope you'll be at least open to the possibility that the people in your life who care about you are expressing genuine concern, and there might be something to be concerned about. Number 3, maybe you're getting some negative feedback at work. Nobody wants to experience this, and when you're stressed out, our common tendency, I think, is to try to protect ourselves and to say, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. That's ridiculous. My boss is so-and-so and such, right? But if you look at that feedback from a more detached point of view, maybe you did snap out at that coworker. Maybe that really wasn't professional. Or maybe you find yourself kind of wrapping up your day at 3:30 because you're just too burned out to continue. I think a lot of us can relate to that, and it's not necessarily the sign of something wrong all by itself, but it's when this stuff starts to add up that we start to pay attention. If you're having more problems than usual with your spouse, this could be yet another sign. If you find yourself snapping out or arguing, maybe having fights and maybe it's harder to make up, maybe you're just feeling like they're not understanding or connecting with you in the way that they once did. This, again, could all be happening. Or it could be that because of your stress level, you're accidentally pushing them away. Or who knows what else could be going on, right? But it might be worth paying attention to and maybe even having a conversation with your loved one about what they're noticing and how you're feeling. Number 5, you experience intense and recurrent feelings of anger, sadness, worry, or fear. Anytime you're having intense emotions, especially when they're recurring, especially when they feel out of proportion to the things happening around you, that's when we need to pay attention. And by the way, it's not limited to those emotions. Those are just some of the most common examples. I would actually say anger is probably the most common, but again, just feeling stressed or anxious could be another, as well as many others. The next here, you have difficulty concentrating. We've all had trouble with this at times, and when we're stressed, of course it can be much worse. But if you're consistently noticing difficulty focusing on the things that you need to get done for your day to go successfully, that's a sign you may be approaching burnout. If you're noticing all sorts of other difficulties, a wide range of things from trouble sleeping, weight changes, unexplained problems in your health, or simply getting sick a lot more than you usually would, these could all be signs that your body is being taxed by stress. You're more vulnerable to things like illness, and so it's more important to pay attention to that and take care of yourself. And finally, if you find yourself using a substance to cope or manage or suppress painful feelings, this is when we truly need to pay attention to this. Again, if it's now and then, maybe not a big deal, but if it's in abundance, this could be something quite harmful. Pay attention to it and catch it before it gets to the point that it's not manageable any longer.